Former President Trump, currently speaking at a campaign rally in New Hampshire, his bid for the 2024 Republican nomination for president continues, and Mr. Trump is still the overwhelming leader for the presidential nomination and leading by big numbers in recent polls. In the recent CNN New York Times poll, among likely GOP voters, former President Trump leads a large field with 54% compared to his next closest rival, Governor Ron DeSantis, at just 17%.
Now, before the speech today, Mr. Trump took to Truth Social to tout his large leads in those polls in early primary states, including New Hampshire, Iowa, and South Carolina. Now, at the same time, the former president has 2 federal and 1 state indictment pertaining to the 2020 election results that he is still fighting, as I'm sure most of you know. Now, the most recent indictment was filed by Jack Smith, a 54-year-old veteran prosecutor appointed as special counsel by Attorney General Merrick Garland in November 2022. And here with more on Jack Smith and his history of prosecutions, Newsmax host John Bachman. John.
As it turns out, novel legal theories and failed attempts to take out elected officials are hallmarks of Jack Smith's career. And he's just part of a long history of problems at the DOJ's so-called public integrity section.
Hi, I'm Eric Holder.
The year was 2010, and the DOJ, under then Attorney General Eric Holder, was shutting down a number of high-profile corruption investigations involving members of Congress, and people wanted to know why. The new chief of the Public Integrity Section, Jack Smith, told the New York Times then that he was not the sort of person who could be cowed, also adding, quote, "I can't imagine how someone who does what I do or has worked with me could think that." At the time, Smith claimed the Public Integrity Section was reinvigorated after the unit was embarrassed in its case against Senator Ted Stevens. The public corruption case against Stevens, a Republican from Alaska, collapsed during the trial after the prosecution failed to disclose some mitigating evidence. As a consequence, the team came under investigation. The top 2 leaders of the section were reassigned, and 1 member on that Stevens trial team later committed suicide. But Smith continued to pursue questionable cases against elected officials and managed to inflict great personal damage on politicians and their careers, like former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. Smith won a conviction of McDonnell, but the case was later tossed out by the Supreme Court.
There appears to be, over the years, a lack of professional judgment in cases of the Public Integrity Section of DOJ when he was in charge, and I'll let the people decide from there.
The court's majority opinion called the case distasteful and rebuked Smith and warned him that, quote, "the uncontrolled power of criminal prosecutors is a threat to our separation of powers." Smith also pursued a case against Democratic vice presidential candidate and former Senator John Edwards. The result was a hung jury and a mistrial. At the time, news reports called it a, quote, "clear and if not complete legal vindication and a likely fatal setback for federal prosecutors, including Jack Smith." Smith also tried to prosecute Democrat Bob Menendez on public corruption charges. The case ended in a mistrial as well. The way this case started was wrong, the way it was investigated was wrong, and the way it was prosecuted was wrong, and the way it was tried was wrong, Menendez said outside the courtroom after he was acquitted. Even the New York Times has cast doubt on Smith's current case against former President Trump. Opinion columnist David Leonhardt says Smith has, quote, "relied on a novel approach and charged Trump with committing criminal fraud and violating conspiracy laws that were not written to prevent the overturning of an election result." I'm John Bachman. Now back to you.
All right. John, thank you very much. Meanwhile, the case against Mr. Trump is continuing. The former president is objecting to the strict limitations proposed by prosecutors in his election interference case. But the prosecution says they proposed the order because Mr. Trump and his lawyers want to try the case in the media. Mr. Trump's lawyers have until 5 p.m. Actually, that was yesterday to submit that, and it has been done. Here to discuss, criminal defense attorney Jacqueline Goodman. Jacqueline, your thoughts about where we stand right now on this case. There was a request, of course, to give Trump and his lawyers a little more time, was not granted. What are your thoughts about how things stand right now?
Well, the protective order is really kind of emblematic of, for the last few years, this has been something that is not unique to Donald Trump. Prosecutors across the country have been attempting to obtain these protective orders for folks that are charged criminally so that they cannot discuss not only the discovery, but issues with respect, for example, to law enforcement. And so those efforts, shall we say, to sort of tamp down the speech of defendants has been around for several years and has seen a surge lately. The uniqueness about Donald Trump's case is two really unique aspects. Number one, the showing that's necessary in order to justify such a protective order, that there's really a need, that there's a potential danger by virtue of the discussion of these documents, that actually might be something that you can show in a case involving the kind of documentation we can imagine is true for this kind of the January 6th case and any case involving a former president. But it seems that Jack Smith is going to actually have to delineate why these documents really do need specific protection, and you have to lay that out in its specificity. The other thing is that this is coming in, obviously the midst of this kind of an election where there's political speech involved, not just an ordinary person's right to free speech, but really is the seat of the democracy. So, so that makes for a really kind of unique balance of the interests that this judge is going to have to take into account when she carves out whatever rules she does.
Right. We're also joined by David Schoen, former President Trump's impeachment lawyer. David, what do you make all of this? What stands out most to you here?
Well, the protective order that they're using in this case that the government's proposed is taken from a case that I had with a couple of these same prosecutors. I don't trust them. I didn't trust them then. I don't trust them now. They over broadly designate sensitive materials. It's a very interesting situation, though. They're really walking a fine line between talking about protective order and a gag order here. The reasons they're offering so far are really more likely reasons for a gag order. But if they're smart, they won't push for a gag order here, because I'm afraid that Mr. Lauro is talking too much and giving away too much of the case, locking his client into too many defenses and specific facts at this point. But in any event, listen, the presumption is an open, fair, public trial. As your guest said, they have to make a particularized showing to get a protective order, especially one like this. And the cases clearly have said, there's an O'Keefe case in the D.C. District Court that says you have to prove that the need for the secrecy overrides the defendant's right to a fair trial. They can't make that showing here, but the judges unfortunately sort of rubber stamp these orders. I think that, what my concern was, they were really going to move for a gag order to President Trump and the lawyers. They have Rule 57.7, the district court, that really stringently applies to lawyers and public comment. But since they're not having President Trump appear for the hearing, it would be completely unfair if they made a gag order, a condition of release, or something like that. I think that last thing I wanted to say is, I think they make a mistake in their response to the gag order. They've only raised First Amendment grounds. There are Sixth Amendment grounds that also apply strongly to a protective order. And I think they really need to raise those grounds. Everybody agrees sensitive material like Social Security numbers and bank records can be kept secret.
Let me make it a little more pedestrian to you, David, about what's the difference between, as far as, we know the president's going to say things and try to get his position in the public. That's fine. At what point do you think it's more threatening, the kind of thing that a judge should step in and say, well, wait a minute, you have to be careful about what you say?
It's hard to delineate any specific point, I think. This judge has shown that she'll react quite quickly to the government's claims that he poses some kind of risk. Right now, really all they're talking about in the protective order is the public dissemination of materials. But listen, they're going to have to disclose these 6 co-conspirators, and very soon, for evidentiary reasons, what's a co-conspirator statement, for due process reasons, double jeopardy reasons, and frankly, for conflict reasons, because you may well find that one of President Trump's lawyers also represents one of the co-conspirators, and they may move to conflict that person out.
All right.
Yeah, Jacqueline, before we have to say goodbye, just a few seconds left, but final words for you.
I was thinking it's really interesting that we are sort of conflating, and in the documents we see it as well, we're conflating the issue of the gag order and a protective order for the discovery. Because
we understand that actually has been out there in the public as a very confusing element. You're right, and we need to keep them separated.
That's right.
Right, and that doesn't go to Trump's alleged threat that if you come after me, I'm going to go after you, and that kind of thing. That's a completely separate issue, and to include it in those filings is kind of I think hiding the ball in a sense. There is an issue. There are 2 separate issues. And I think that they'll both be addressed by this judge.
All right, Jacqueline Goodman, David Schoen, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And this week, all eyes on the state of Georgia, as former President Trump is expected to get what would be his 4th indictment any day in that state. Are these indictments helping or hurting former president's 2024 campaign? Here with his thoughts, host of Dick Morris Democracy, the advisor to President Trump and former advisor to President Clinton, Dick Morris. Dick, if anybody knows what may or may not affect a candidate's campaign, it would be you. So what are your thoughts?
Well, the GOP primary, no. The general election, possibly. In the primary, Trump has had, there have been polls after the indictment, the major indictment, the G6 indictment, the J6 indictment. And everybody who was for Trump stayed for Trump. I think his margin even went up a touch. He's at 59% of the vote in a multi-candidate field. I think in a two-way race against DeSantis, he's over 60. And that has been solidified by the indictments. The Republican Party is going to nominate Donald Trump. There's no real question about that. And DeSantis, the disarray in his campaign, firing his campaign manager and all of that, I think have created a situation where Trump is even more ascendant in the Republican primary. On the other hand, I can't be sure. Excuse me.
It's all right.
On the other hand, I can't be sure in the general election. We don't have any good polls with national samples after the indictment. Trump was clinging to a 4 to 6 point lead over Biden in my polling and in John McLaughlin's polling. And in the published polling, it's been about a tie, but usually tending slightly toward Trump. We just don't know yet. I do think that it's fair to say that the major threat to Trump's candidacy at the moment is the courts, not the voters.
Does he worry about that, Dick? That's what I wanted to ask before we go. Does he worry about what he looks at and feels is maybe unfair, for instance, in Washington?
Well, it's a huge amount of what he looks at. He's become increasingly confident, and rightly so, that he can beat Biden and that he will get the nomination. But whether he's going to be able to run and not be either totally impeded by the indictments or perhaps even something in the middle of the case have something that blocks him.
Yeah.
I think that's a tremendous concern.
Yeah.
We really functionally now have a candidate, Donald Trump, running against the judiciary, and that's the opposition.
Interesting.
The judiciary might.
Yeah, we've never seen anything like this historically. Dick Morris, thank you.
Thank you.